All right, guys, I hope you are having a very great time. So this is another session. We are sitting in here and following the last two, meeting where we discussed over the essential tools for these startups, setting the goals, defining the virtual CFO, and now it's turn to digging something out, discussing another important aspects of how we are going to implement those tools. I'm sitting with Carol. Thank you very much for your time, Carol. And again,
Tina.
so let's just start with this strategic financial planning. Before, when we traditionally thinking of all right financial management as a separate discipline, it has its core elements and components where we traditionally think of all right financial management is a discipline or a field of study where people are being engaged with, or even the services that this discipline is producing is only focused on probably financial reporting, let's say bookkeeping, budgeting, managing cash flow, and something like this. And now we are thinking in a step further, like we are calling it strategic financial management, where we believe that these days needs us to be much more agile, needs us to be much more accurate, conscious, aware about how we are utilizing the techniques of financial management to turn it into this strategic financial management. So have you got any particular definition to that?
Thanks, Tina, for the great introduction. Yeah, I want to start by saying, like, if you don't know where you're going, any road can take you there. Like, this for itself talks about how important planning is, especially for startups and entrepreneurs that are just starting. Like, I guess when we want to talk about planning, different initiatives in the company or in a world of finance and business can kind of spark planning, such as like if you want to introduce a change in your company, or if you're a startup and you're starting from scratch, so definitely needs a lot of planning. Or if you have your company established and you are introducing some change, as I mentioned before, like bringing some digital transformation, all those things need planning. What we wanted to talk about today with you was
Mhm.
around strategic planning and maybe segue a little bit into financial planning. So what I want to talk about the strategic planning is like there are different stages and the process into the planning process itself. And it all starts with sitting down and thinking about where we are today, right now. So if we are just starting, what are our capabilities? What are my capabilities, and what are my team's capabilities? Co-founders, any strength that we can bring to the table. And then, like apart from the strength, in terms of like if we are on ideation stage, or if where are we right now in terms of our business or our idea or our startup, and then from there start imagining where we really want to go, and start
Yeah.
seeing that journey, and then seeing, oh, okay, I'm here, but I want to grow, I want to build, and then putting all those pieces together as we go along. And then when we talk about that journey, when we think about the journey and planning it, we need to see what are the obstacles that maybe come along the way, and then how can we overcome those obstacles. So that's the definition I put into a strategic planning when I think about it.
Well, that's actually a perfect introduction and definitions of this very new discipline, because we have already discussed this, and people might, let's say, confuse that. All right, what we are doing with this financial management from one side, and then okay, what is this strategy being added like a prefix, and then what would be the new definition is. But Carol, the point is that the implementation of the tools available, because we have heard before, we have studied before that, all right, if um, there are probably some steps, 1, 2, 3, consequently to be implemented. And can you just dig a little bit of of the probably the steps that, for example, where the owner of the startups is sitting, and then he or she's setting his goals, and then prioritize those goals, and then taking a look at the characters of those goals regarding that SMART, acronym, and then what would be the next step if they are if they are percepting that, all right, I'm doing this successfully, I'm just working towards this successful planning. What could be the real steps to be taken?
Yeah, great point, Sina, because in our previous video, we definitely talked about a SMART and what are those characteristics of a good goal to have. But then, yeah, when you're sitting down and you're thinking, okay, I have set up my goals and I kind of have my strategic priorities in place, but what is my next step? What should I do? So the next step is to evaluate different the elements that goes into your environment. So we kind of break down that environment between internal and external. So I'm gonna leave the external environment to you if that's okay, and I
Sure.
want to touch base on the internal part. Which I kind of mentioned. One of them, for example, was like thinking about the strength of your team and your co-founder. So what we would do and we would suggest is one of the methods for you to be able to evaluate your internal environment is do a SWOT analysis. Like the SWOT analysis, as the acronym suggests, is strength, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So that is gonna give you a very nice snapshot of where you are right now in terms of like what you are good at, and then what are the risks that are out there. That's gonna kind of in terms of external environment, the risks are gonna come. But are you strong enough as a team, or are you strong enough financially to be able to stand those threats? So like all the pieces of the SWOT analysis are kind of interlinked together. When you work on your threats that kind of are external, they are going to impact the internal part as well. And then when you talk about the opportunities, which is kind of the external part of the puzzle, is like if the opportunity comes, are you ready to take on the tasks and like hit the ground running? Like if an investor come to you and say, you know what, we love your idea, we want to invest in your business, do you have everything in place? So one of the steps, I guess, that we suggest to do when you are going through the strategic planning process and establishing where you are right now is doing the SWOT. What do you think about it, Sina?
Yeah, well, perfectly. And this is great because we work with these startups, and then they say that, all right, they are so already familiar with these acronyms where the SWOT things is being mentioned, and then they say that, all right, I'm going to focus on my. But can we, Carol? Can we? It's very important. Could be. Can we distinguish between when it is a good time to focus on internal environment and when should we prioritize that? Are there in sequence or no? We're just coming up as a priority with this. Okay, first of all, let's just utilize all resources and focus on internal side, or no, let's just focus first on the external side. Imagine a seed or pre-seed stage. So what you think?
Like every business, especially startups, we live in an ecosystem that internal and external parts like really work together. It's not that you need to focus on the internal solely and forget about the external, or focus solely on the external and think about, okay, I'm gonna work on my internal issues later on. So what I believe and what I have been dealing with the startups that I work with, and I suggest that these need to go hand in hand. And then like when you are thinking about your internal, try to kind of link it to the external environment as well. Let's go through an example. For example, for a pre-seed company that we are like trying to fund our company and then just find our footing, right? We are at the very start of the whole journey. What is important is like how those elements that are out there, like the competition, maybe they're gonna come and eat us alive. That's an external environment. And then at the same time, when we are kind of like looking at the competitors, we are going to look at our strengths and weaknesses to see if we are really strong to go after the competition, or try to offer something that's better than them or cheaper than them, or like all those elements that go to the competitive analysis. And then see what are the weaknesses as well. Like if a very big competitor come, like are we not financially strong to withstand them? So that's what I think. I guess like these go really hand in hand. What is your thought on that?
Well, that's definitely correct, because you know, the earlier you are working with your company, the teams is not formed yet. Probably the ideas are not completely, let's say, born yet, and then so probably most of the things is on paper, or the MVP, or in terms of production, in terms of marketing, probably you're negotiating how to you're running your first and early campaign. So ultimately, depending on what type of business you're starting, you know, it could be consulting service, web development, website design, whatever that is, even on manufacturing. But yes, I agree that let's just first focus on the internal side of a business, because the internal side tends to be, you know, including all resources that we have. And all these resources are available because the owner of a business, first of all, is thinking of, all right, what type of resources I have, I need to utilize and employ my let's say, human resources. Do I have access to capital? How complete my idea is, and those, let's say, the value chain things that we have already discussed, that how we are thinking of, all right, let's come up with the best value proposition in terms of creating value. What are the supply chain, you know, processes in terms of delivering, and ultimately what is our revenue model in terms of capturing the value at last. All these together are in contributing towards this successful strategic financial management. And one more thing is that why we are focusing on this financial, you know, along with this marketing, operation, product management, as the other disciplines of management, I mean, is that financial is the only tool, or I can say is the most appropriate, you know, like a converter, where we have everything in quality and quantity, and now we want to go ahead and then take the next decisions with the upper, you know, level and sort of thing. So financial discipline is helping us to think more effectively in terms of converting our goals into figures, trends, and even if we haven't achieved any figures, we haven't done anything, we are too early, still finance and financial discipline can help us to design some dashboards in order to measure. And this is where the KPI, I'm going to ask you the next question, design the KPI and then go further and further again. But my opinion over this, apart from whatever technique that we are using, I believe that the owner of the early businesses should focus first on their internal resources, to see that into what extent they are going to utilize each, into what extent they are going to develop each, and into what extent they are going to implement each phases. So with whatever technique we are using to measure where we are at the moment, what is our performance, what is our position. So I believe that, yes, let's just focus on the internal side of a business first of all, and then while we are developing each function, while we are working in each function, it's a good idea to, you know, get on with the next steps where we think that, all right, where this, how we are complete this whole supply chain, who are our suppliers, what are the solutions out there, what we can do with this marketing things, and then do some further analysis, which is, by the way, including volatility of the market, macroeconomic from one side, and then a lot of other, let's say, factors that is contributing, like the competitive position, the dynamism, the history, the everything, the demographic, the social, that are contributing to each, side and, factors of like the economy, environment, legislation, environment, financial risks, and everything. So, but by the way, this is so cool because we had some sessions with the startups. They first confused of, all right, they are thinking about the techniques instead of how to doing it. With the techniques, I'm telling you that it's not necessarily useful at this stage, because um, they were looking for some like standard deviation statistical solutions, like how they are going to avoid a big risk. But one point for the owner is that you don't know where you are going. If Carol, that if we were talking, last year, 2019, we were so sure than the environments and the positions and where we were and where we were planning to go with. But these days, come on, it's not even. I have lost myself my prediction abilities that I am not even sure that, all right, what is the performance of this company? Beforehand it was so great. The most stable one, the most stable positioned, well positioned, companies these days are even lost their predictability. And I have seen those giant, companies already set their 2030 strategy for the next 10 years. And now it seems that within the last 2 years, they have been sitting, the executives, and now they are revising their planning. And they kind of concluded that, oops, long-term and strategic planning, somehow it's not stable anymore. Let's just go on with this tactical one, which is less long-term and kind of a more short-term. And then because when they are, in terms of goal setting, if you remember, when we are putting the goal, they should be the accessible goals. They should be a measurable goals. So the less long-term we are thinking, I believe the more effective we are planning ahead.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I agree with you. Like
yeah,
definitely,
definitely.
COVID changed a lot about
Yeah.
the approach that companies take towards a strategic planning. And like before, what I was hearing here and there was like, why should I focus on the external environment? Like it's so much out of my control. Like I'm not the one that sets the law. Like who should I care about? Like let's say like the legal environment, like what's gonna be the import and export that changes that's gonna come up. I want to really sit down and focus on my like all the internal factors that you just mentioned, the financial capabilities, how good we are, how good the idea is, how can we execute. But then COVID changed a lot of things, because with one virus, like we can't even plan what's gonna happen next week in terms of like the rules that's gonna be around running your business, like the laws, the tax rates, everything is changing. And now a lot of entrepreneurs and startups, and as you mentioned, bigger corporations are now getting into agile planning and say, let's just adopt the agile approach and then be like short term, quick. We hit our goals, let's say maybe a quarter or 2 quarters or 6 months, or I don't know how short, but then meet again and then plan and then like have some KPIs around having a quicker turnaround in terms of like the long-term planning, and maybe have a horizon in front of us and know where we want to go 5 years down the road. But the planning cycle is getting shorter and shorter for sure.
Yeah, sure. From one side, I see that we've got treatment available, we've got vaccinations available, and on the other side, I still that the uncertainty and volatility, still remaining, and people are, confused, executives, and especially it seems that where we are sitting and reading, the surveys and then the studies, we see that probably the next few years or months are not going to be a good time for the startups, unless they have really effective strategies in place. And you know, speaking honestly about the strategies, how we are going to bring up this and the importance role of you know, virtual CFOs. Carol, what do you think? How they can contribute towards this, you know, assisting early startups and immature ones to survive these days?
Yeah, what I believe and what I have been like working with different clients is like every level of that strategic planning that you think about, the areas that we touched based on very briefly, and the areas that we are gonna continue talking about is like thinking about where you are right now, looking at the horizon, where you want to go. Like all those steps and elements and the process that you go through has a financial aspect to it. Like
Yeah.
the plan
Hmm.
needs to have a number against it, and then it needs to be sensible and it needs to make sense for the current situation. If the things change, if the matrix change, how those changes are going to impact your results, your numbers, and the outlook that you are trying to work towards. And the CFO, with all the insights that she or he has, in terms of like putting the strategy to get a strategy together and how those numbers kind of come together and form a very nice strategic plan, definitely can help a startup team, an entrepreneur, a business that just is starting, or an established
Hmm.
organization, no matter how big the size is.
Yeah.
And definitely play a pivotal role in terms of
Hmm.
bringing the whole vision together, and then
Hmm.
make that business a financially viable one. Because I keep saying a lot of good ideas are out there, but like the execution matters the most, as we have heard over and over. But apart from the execution is like how that idea and business is going to sustain itself in terms of like producing results and producing profits for all the stakeholders, if it's a for-profit business, for sure.
So this is really great. And Carol, I think that in order to end this great discussion, I believe that let's focus on the KPIs, the appropriate ones that are that you think suitable for the early startups. The examples of KPI, we know that, especially when we arrive to that figures and we are having this little bit growth, and then we have a kind of a trend where we are, you know, learning some lessons, and now we are going to plan for the future. So imagine that and a startup is sitting planning for its the next year, and they are not that much involved with the figures. They do not have that much trend. So what KPI do you suggest them as the most appropriate benchmark where they can later on, you know, compare the actual results with the target ones?
Great point, Sina. Like setting up different KPIs is very different for, like, I guess we are talking about the startups and entrepreneurs, right? But I want to kind of touch base on the companies that are already operating, and they have revenues. Like when you are operating and you have revenues, your KPIs are mostly, like not mostly, but like some of them are focused on present, and then how you can build your business based on these present data and then into the future. Like what do I mean by that? For example, like one of the KPIs for the businesses that are operating and generating revenue is revenue growth. So they have a trend, as you mentioned, like they have past year's revenue and they want to see how they are growing. And based on that measurement, they can go and build their growth plan for next year or next month or next quarter. So that's kind of the KPI. And what do we mean by KPI? Maybe we should have talked about it at the beginning.
Yeah, sure.
KPI means key performance measurement. So why do we need KPIs? Because KPIs, they are like kind of like show how good you are becoming or how you are getting better and better over time. And that's why we put those measurement in place, right? Because in finance, in business, we always need to measure. But
Mm-hmm.
then when we want to talk about the startups and entrepreneurs and the companies that are just starting, they don't have a trend to go back and look at, okay, last year's revenue, past months, let's say cash burn rate. So they don't have an actual trend to go back and then compare themselves with. What I suggest and what we kind of set them up for the dashboards that they can use is kind of look at how you can reduce your expenses and costs. So because you don't have revenue, right? You don't have anything that you are basically selling right away. So your focus needs to be on efficiency, how you can increase your efficiency to be able to kind of like grow, and then decrease your, one of the best KPIs that I love for entrepreneurs and startups is their cash burn rate. What does that mean? It means how fast you're actually burning your cash. So how fast your expenses are going out, or cash is going out of the door, like how fast you're spending. And that's the focus that you really need to bring to your company and to your team, to be able to really monitor and focus and put that emphasis on the efficiency and how you can become better and better on that. This is my suggestion for the smaller teams and the ones that are just starting.
Yeah, definitely, because among a lot of KPIs where we need to sit and then benchmark not only our probably performance, but also we can later on compare our performance with what it is outside of a company, where it gives us a better prospects of where we are and where we are going actually. Well, that preliminary, we've got some dashboards where the financial management discipline is helping us to design in order to like see that, all right, where how in terms of and to what extent the product is being developed. So the KPIs are actually changing, and because the product representing the performance, the total performance of a company in terms of how penetration rate is being done, how activation rate, how the active users are being absorbed, the average sales cycle length, like the burn rate that you said, because the focus of every startup is on cash flow and then ultimately on profitability. So the more cash flow we can generate, the more cash flow the company is able to generate, the more attractive it looks like for the investors, the more it is effective in terms of employing its resources, the more it can manage its suppliers, the more effective the supply management whole process is. So yeah, there are different kinds of dashboards, and I believe that probably next meeting we have to dig out some practical dashboards for especially the earliest startups, because why we're putting much of our focus on the early startups, pre-seed and seed, because I believe that virtual CFOs are more contributing to these stages, because if you're taking their hands and then direct them into showing that land like a lantern, we've discussed that already, it is more useful. But I myself personally am not that much cautious or aware of, even worry about the kind of grown stage of startups or those that have already found their ways. So let's just focus on these earlier startups, and then probably definitely, I mean, we are going to have a great stuff for them in our next meetings.
Definitely, yeah, definitely.
Yes.
Next time, maybe we can bring up even some slides and then walk through some of the concepts that we have talked about it during these past 3 or 4 videos.
Yes.
Because in the past 3 or 4 videos, we basically touched based on different concepts and different terminologies, and now it's time to bring all that and maybe bring some examples and then put them into practice, because then people can relate to it, and then we can really help them find their way. And then, as you mentioned, virtual CFOs, we are here to support the smaller teams, the ones that they're just starting, because they don't have the resources to go through and then get a bigger team, bigger finance team. Or so we are here to support them. We kind of mention and touch base on the bigger companies because they're good examples for everybody to relate to. But yeah, we are here to support and coach the smaller ones, definitely, for sure. And thank you so much for your time, Sina. That was great.
Thank you very much, Carol, for your time and support. Thank you.
Yeah,
see you soon.
Yeah, see you next time. Bye.
Bye.